The recruits said nothing could move the Karn IV tank simulator without a full crew and magnetic tethers. Then Cadet Reyes walked up, wrapped her fingers under the frame, and sent 80 tons of steel spinning through the air like a child's discarded toy, and the laughter died before the echo did. Sergeant Vok had been running recruitment training for the Galactic Defense Initiative for 9 standard cycles, and he'd seen a lot of species try to impress him. Humans were new to the fold, barely cleared for integration after 6 months of diplomatic wrangling and endless debates about whether they counted as sentient enough to be trusted with coalition weapons. Most species earned their place through technological contribution or rare resources. Humans earned theirs because someone in the upper echelons decided it was safer to have them inside the tent than outside it. Vok didn't care much about politics. He cared about whether a recruit could hold the line when plasma started flying, and so far the human cadets looked about as threatening as a bowl of Grille paste. The morning air on Station Taros smelled like ozone and recycled sweat, the kind of sterile funk that clung to every military installation Vok had ever served on. The sky overhead was a pale synthetic dome, engineered to mimic natural light cycles for the benefit of species that needed circadian rhythms to function. The training yard stretched out in a flat expanse of packed gravel and durasteel plating, marked with obstacle courses, gunnery ranges, and the massive silhouette of the Karn IV simulator parked near the center like a monument to brute engineering. The tank was a relic from the Krillin border skirmishes, decommissioned and repurposed as a training tool because it was too expensive to scrap and too outdated to deploy. It weighed 80 metric tons empty, powered by dual fusion cores that had been stripped out years ago. What remained was a hollow shell of reinforced plating, treads locked in place, turret permanently fixed forward. It wasn't supposed to move. It was supposed to sit there and remind recruits that war was heavy. Reyes was assigned to Squad 12, a mixed unit of Zenthari, Krillin, and 2 other humans who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She was short by human standards, maybe 5'4" in standard gravity, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and a face that didn't give much away. Vok had read her intake file the night before. Former construction worker from somewhere called Colorado. No formal military training. No augmentations. No genetic modifications. She'd scored average on the cognitive assessments and barely passed the endurance trials. The only thing notable in her file was a flagged incident during orientation week where she'd accidentally bent a door handle clean off trying to open it. The medical officer had chalked it up to adrenaline and poor station maintenance. Vok wasn't sure he believed that, but he also wasn't sure it mattered. Bent door handles didn't win battles. The morning's exercise was straightforward. Each squad had to move the tank simulator 10 meters using only their issued gear and whatever teamwork they could muster. It was a lesson in problem solving and cooperation, the kind of drill that separated coordinated units from glorified mobs. Most squads used mag clamps and tow cables, synchronized their efforts, and dragged the tank inch by agonizing inch across the field. It took time. It took sweat. It took shouting and recalibration, and at least one argument about proper leverage angles. Squad 12's turn came late in the rotation, after 3 other units had already completed the task, and 2 had failed outright. The Zenthari in the group were lanky bipeds with elongated limbs and skin like polished stone, their faces impassive as they assessed the tank. The Krillin were stockier, their exoskeletons clicking softly as they moved, compound eyes glinting in the dome light. One of the other humans, a tall guy named Tors, looked at the tank and then at Reyes and said something Vok couldn't hear from where he stood. Reyes said something back. Tors shook his head. The Zenthari squad leader, a female named Shice, stepped forward and gestured toward the mag clamps stacked near the equipment cache. The Krillin, a male called Threk, made a chittering sound that Vox translator rendered as skeptical agreement. Reyes didn't move toward the equipment. She stood there looking at the tank, arms crossed, expression neutral. Shice said something sharp. Reyes replied. The exchange lasted maybe 10 seconds before Shice threw up her hands and turned away, muttering something about human obstinacy. Threk clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement or irritation. Tors sighed and started hauling cables. Vok watched from the observation platform, datapad in hand, already marking Squad 12 down for poor cohesion. They had 5 minutes to come up with a plan and another 15 to execute. Most squads used the full 20. Squad 12 didn't look like they had a plan at all. Reyes stood apart from the group, staring at the tank like it had personally offended her. Shice was directing Tors and the Krelin to position the cables, her movements efficient but visibly frustrated. Threk kept glancing at Reyes and clicking to himself. The countdown timer hit 4 minutes. Then Reyes walked toward the tank. She didn't head for the equipment cache. She didn't call out to her squad. She just walked straight up to the front of the simulator, crouched down, and slid her hands under the lowest edge of the frontal plating. Vok felt his secondary stomach clench. The Karn IV's frame sat less than 10 centimeters off the ground when parked, barely enough clearance for fingers, let alone a proper grip. Reyes wiggled her hands deeper, adjusted her stance, and took a breath. Shice stopped mid-instruction and turned. Tors froze with a cable half-coiled. Threk's mandibles went still. Across the training yard, other squads who'd finished their drills started to notice. A Zenthari from Squad 7 pointed. A human from Squad 3 laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. Vok tapped his datapad to start a secondary recording feed, more out of curiosity than expectation. He'd seen recruits try stupid things before. Bravado was common, success was not. Reyes pulled. The tank didn't move. Reyes adjusted her footing, spreading her legs wider, and pulled again. Still nothing. A murmur rippled through the observation deck. Someone from Squad 9 shouted something that Vok's translator didn't bother rendering, probably because it was just noise shaped like mockery. Reyes didn't react. She repositioned her hands, bent her knees deeper, and this time when she pulled, the front of the tank lifted. Not much. Maybe 5 centimeters. Maybe less, but it lifted. The gravel beneath the tank's forward treads crunched as weight redistributed. The murmur turned into something louder. Shice took a step back. Tors dropped the cable. Reyes held the lift for 2 seconds, 3, and then set the tank back down with a metallic thud that echoed across the yard. She stood up, rolled her shoulders, and looked at Shice. "We're doing this the fast way or the slow way." Shice opened her mouth, closed it, and then made a gesture that Vok's translator rendered as bewildered agreement. Threk's mandibles started clicking again, faster this time. Tors looked like someone had just explained a joke he didn't understand but felt obligated to laugh at anyway. Reyes crouched again, slid her hands back under the tank, and this time when she pulled, she didn't stop. The tank lifted. Not all the way, but enough that the front treads cleared the ground by a solid 15 centimeters. Reyes took a step forward. The tank came with her. She took another step. The tank followed. She pivoted on her right foot, angling toward the 10-meter marker painted on the field, and the tank swung in a slow arc, treads scraping the gravel in parallel grooves. Somewhere behind Vok, a squad leader from the Krelin contingent made a sound like a deflating balloon. Reyes took another step. The tank moved another meter. Her breathing was audible now, sharp and rhythmic, but she wasn't slowing down. If anything, she was speeding up. Shice found her voice first. "Cadet Reyes, you cannot possibly maintain that for..." Reyes interrupted by lifting the tank higher. High enough that the rear treads barely touched the ground. And then she did something that would later be described in 15 different incident reports as either spectacular or catastrophic depending on who filed the paperwork. She twisted her torso, planted her left foot, and threw the tank. 80 metric tons of decommissioned steel and composite alloy left her hands in a flat trajectory that carried it 7 meters through the air before it hit the ground nose first with a sound like a building giving up on existence. The impact cratered the gravel, sent a shockwave rippling outward in a perfect circle of disturbed dust, and caused 3 separate motion-sensitive alarms to trigger across the station's security grid. The tank skidded another 4 meters on momentum alone, gouging twin furrows into the field before it came to rest 15 centimeters past the 10-meter marker. The training yard went silent. Reyes straightened, brushed her hands on her thighs and looked at Vok. That count. Vok stared at his datapad. The recording feed was still running. The timer showed 2 minutes and 18 seconds elapsed, 15 meters, no equipment used, 1 recruit. He looked at the tank, then at Reyes, then at the datapad again as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. He tapped the comm link to the station's medical bay and said, "I need a full physiological scan on Cadet Reyes human, Squad 12. Priority flagged. And someone get me a structural integrity report on that simulator before I let anyone near it again." Scheisse walked over to the tank, reached out with one long finger, and tapped the hull plating as if checking whether it was real. Threk made a sound like wind through broken glass. Tors sat down in the gravel and put his head in his hands. Across the yard, the laughter that had started when Reyes first approached the tank had evaporated completely, replaced by a silence so thick Vok could hear his own pulse in his secondary hearts. Reyes tilted her head. "Sergeant." Vok closed his datapad. "Dismissed. All of you. Reyes, you stay." The rest of Squad 12 didn't need to be told twice. They scattered like thermal moths in a spotlight, Tors glancing back once over his shoulder before disappearing into the barracks corridor. The other squads followed suit, murmuring in a dozen languages, their voices low and uncertain. Vok walked down from the observation platform and crossed the field toward Reyes, his boots crunching on gravel still settling from the impact. Up close, she looked exactly the same as she had before she'd thrown a tank across a field. No visible strain, no tremor in her hands. No sweat on her brow despite the fact that she just performed a feat of strength that should have required a loading mech and hydraulic assistance. Vok stopped 2 meters away and folded his arms. "You want to tell me how you did that?" Reyes shrugged. "Lifted it and threw it. I saw what you did, I'm asking how. I don't know, I just did." Vok's jaw plates clicked together, a reflexive sign of irritation he'd never quite managed to suppress. "You just did. You just picked up 80 metric tons of tank simulator like it was a training weight and threw it hard enough to crater my field, and you don't know how. That about covers it, yeah. Have you done this before?" Reyes hesitated, and in that hesitation Vok saw the first crack in her composure. She looked away, toward the barracks, then back at him. "Not exactly. I mean, I've lifted heavy stuff. I used to work construction. Moved a lot of steel beams, concrete blocks, that kind of thing. But nothing like that. I didn't know I could do that until I did it. And you didn't think this was something worth mentioning during intake processing. I didn't think it was that weird. Humans lift stuff all the time. Humans lift equipment rated for their body mass. Humans do not throw battle tanks." Reyes opened her mouth, closed it, and then said, "Fair point." Vok tapped his comm link again. "Medical update. I want that scan done in the next hour. And get me a supervisor from the Xenobiology division. I think we missed something." The voice on the other end confirmed with a clipped acknowledgement. Vok cut the link and looked at Reyes again. She met his gaze without flinching, but there was something in her eyes now, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. She knew this was bigger than a bent door handle. She knew she'd just made herself a problem, and problems in the military got studied, cataloged, and reassigned until someone figured out what to do with them. Vok's tone softened just slightly. "You're not in trouble, Reyes." but you're about to spend the next few days answering a lot of questions from people who are going to want to know why you can do what you just did. Understand? Reyes nodded. Yeah, I get it. Good, go to medical. They'll run the scan. After that, report to my office. We're going to have a longer conversation. She turned to go, then stopped and looked back. Sergeant, that really was the fastest way to move it. Vok watched her walk away, her stride even and unhurried, and allowed himself a single long exhale. Somewhere in the Coalition's upper command structure, someone was about to have a very interesting day. Humans had been cleared for integration 6 months ago based on a profile that described them as average in physical capability, slightly above average in adaptability, and useful primarily for their industrial base and strategic positioning near a contested trade corridor. The profile said nothing about individuals who could throw tanks. Vok pulled up his datapad and started composing a report, then stopped halfway through the first sentence because he wasn't sure how to phrase it in a way that wouldn't get flagged as a joke or a malfunction. The Karn IV simulator sat where it had landed, nose buried in gravel, turret canted at an angle that would take an engineering crew hours to correct. Vok looked at it and thought about the last time he'd been genuinely surprised by a recruit. It had been 7 cycles ago, back on Threshold Station, when a Drethian cadet had figured out how to bypass a combat drone's targeting algorithm using nothing but a polished meal tray and some very creative geometry. That had been impressive. This was something else entirely. He finished the report in 3 sentences, flagged it urgent, and sent it up the chain. Then he walked over to the tank, placed one clawed hand on the hull plating and pushed. The tank didn't move. He pushed harder, engaging his secondary muscle groups, the ones that let his species haul supply crates up ramps in high gravity. The tank shifted maybe half a centimeter, metal groaning in protest. Vok let go and looked at his hand. No damage, no strain. Just the same claws and scales he'd had since hatching. He looked in the direction Reyes had gone and muttered, "What are you people?" The medical bay on Station Taros occupied the eastern wing of the main structure, a sterile maze of diagnostic pods and treatment alcoves lit by panels that adjusted their spectrum based on the species being examined. Reyes had been in the bay for 40 minutes when the xenobiology supervisor arrived, a Velian named Dr. Corinth, who moved with the smooth glide of someone whose homeworld had oceans instead of land. Corinth's skin was a deep teal, her eyes large and unblinking, her voice modulated through a vocoder that gave her words a liquid quality. She'd been stationed on Taros for 2 cycles, specializing in integration physiology for newly admitted species, and in that time she'd cataloged everything from Krelin neuroplasticity to Xanthari photosynthetic efficiency. Humans were her latest subject, and so far they'd been disappointingly mundane. Corinth reviewed Reyes' scan results on a hollow display, the data rendered in overlapping layers of bone density, muscle composition, and cellular structure. The readings were unusual, but not in the ways Corinth had expected. Reyes' bone density was elevated compared to baseline human averages, her muscle fibers denser and more tightly packed, her connective tissue reinforced with a fibrous protein matrix that Corinth's database didn't have a clear analog for. But none of it was augmented. There were no implants, no genetic markers for modification, no signs of external enhancement. This was natural variance, the kind of thing that cropped up in any species with sufficient genetic diversity. Corinth cycled through the data again, frowning at the hormone panel. Reyes' adrenal output spiked under stress, which was normal, but the spike was sharper and more sustained than baseline human profiles suggested it should be. Her myostatin levels were lower than expected, which would explain the increased muscle density, but myostatin suppression didn't account for the force output Sergeant Vok's report described. 80 tons. Corinth ran the math 3 times to make sure she hadn't misunderstood the unit conversion. 80 metric tons. No leverage assist. No mechanical advantage. Just raw output. She looked up from the display and found Reyes sitting on the exam table, legs dangling, expression somewhere between bored and worried. Corinth approached slowly, vocoder chiming to signal non-aggression, a reflex from years of working with species that startled easily. Reyes didn't startle. She just watched Corinth with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was used to being studied. Corinth gestured to the display. Your scan results are complete, Cadet Reyes. I have reviewed them thoroughly. I would like to ask you some questions if you are comfortable answering. Reyes shrugged. Sure, go ahead. Have you always been physically stronger than your peers? I guess. I mean, I played sports in school. Softball, track, some volleyball. I was good at it, but not like record-breaking good. Just good enough that people asked me to help move furniture and carry stuff. I didn't think about it much. And your family, do they share similar physical capabilities? Reyes paused, and Corinth noted the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders drew inward slightly. My dad did. He worked construction too, could lift just about anything. My mom said he once carried a steel I-beam up 4 flights of stairs by himself because the crane broke. But he died when I was 12, so I don't know if he could have done what I just did. I see. And your mother? Normal. I mean, she was strong for her size, but not like me or my dad. Corinth made a note on her datapad, then gestured to the scan display again. Your bone density is approximately 15% higher than the human baseline average. Your muscle fiber composition shows an unusually high ratio of fast-twitch to slow-twitch fibers, and your myostatin levels are significantly suppressed. All of these factors would contribute to increased strength, but they do not fully account for the force output described in Sergeant Vox's report. Do you experience pain or discomfort when exerting yourself at high levels? Not really. I mean, I get sore if I overdo it, but it goes away fast, faster than it used to anyway. How much faster? Reyes thought for a moment. Used to be if I did a full day of heavy lifting, I'd wake up stiff the next morning. Now I'm fine by the time I go to bed. Maybe a little tight, but nothing major. Corinth's frown deepened. Accelerated recovery wasn't unprecedented, but combined with the other factors, it suggested something more systemic. She pulled up a secondary panel showing Reyes's cellular mitochondrial function. The readings were elevated, consistent with high metabolic efficiency, but again within the bounds of natural variance. There was no smoking gun, no single data point that explained what Reyes had done, and yet she had done it, 80 tons. Corinth had watched the recording footage 3 times. There was no trick, no hidden assist, no angle that changed the math. Reyes had simply grabbed the tank and thrown it. Corinth set the datapad down and folded her hands, a gesture meant to convey calm deliberation. Cadet Reyes, based on your scan results, I can confirm that you are not augmented, modified, or otherwise altered from your natural human baseline. What you possess is an extreme expression of traits that exist within human genetic diversity. However, the degree to which you express these traits is unprecedented in my database. I will need to flag your file for further study and potentially conduct follow-up assessments over the next several weeks. Reyes's jaw tightened. Does that mean I'm off the training roster? That determination will be made by Sergeant Vox and the command staff. My role is to provide medical and physiological context, not operational decisions. But you think they'll pull me? Corinth hesitated, then chose honesty over platitude. I think they will want to understand you before they deploy you. That is not the same as removing you from service, but it may delay your progression through the training program. Reyes looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers slowly. I didn't ask to be like this. I just wanted to do my part. Sign up, serve, go home when it's over. Now I'm a problem. You are not a problem, cadet. You are an unknown. In the military, unknowns are studied until they become knowns. It is the nature of institutional risk management. It does not reflect on your value or your intent. Reyes didn't respond. She sat there on the exam table, staring at her hands, and Corinth felt an unfamiliar pang of something that might have been sympathy. Humans were new to the coalition, still figuring out where they fit in a galaxy that had been organized without them for centuries. Reyes had probably thought signing up meant blending in, being part of something larger than herself, proving that her species deserved its seat at the table. Instead, she just made herself a singular case study, isolated by her own capability. Corinth picked up her datapad and made a final note. You are cleared to return to your quarters, Cadet. Sergeant Vach will contact you when he is ready to proceed. In the meantime, I recommend you avoid any further displays of exceptional strength unless explicitly instructed by a commanding officer. Reyes slid off the table and nodded. Understood. She left the medical bay without another word, the door hissing shut behind her. Corinth watched her go, then pulled up the recording footage one more time. She isolated the frame where Reyes first lifted the tank, magnified the image, and studied the angle of her stance, the set of her shoulders, the expression on her face. There was no strain visible. No grimace, no tremor, no indication that she was operating at her limit. If anything, she looked calm, focused, like she was doing something she'd done 100 times before, even though she hadn't. Corinth closed the file and sent her report to Vach with a priority flag. Whatever Reyes was, she was going to keep the station's command staff busy for a long time. Sergeant Vach's office was small and functional, located in the administrative wing of the barracks complex. The walls were bare except for a single framed commendation from his service during the Drethian incursion, the text written in a script that looked like frozen lightning. His desk was cluttered with datapads, requisition forms, and a half-empty mug of something that had gone cold hours ago. When Reyes knocked on the door frame, Vach looked up from a report he'd been reading and gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside and stood at attention, hands clasped behind her back, posture rigid. Vach studied her for a moment, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze stayed fixed on a point just over his left shoulder. He'd seen that look before, usually on recruits who were trying very hard not to show they were scared. He waved a hand. At ease, Reyes, sit. She sat, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to bolt at any moment. Vach pushed the datapad aside and leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. Dr. Corinth sent me her report. You're cleared medically. No augmentations, no modifications, just you being you. Yes, Sergeant. Which brings us to the question of what exactly you are. Reyes blinked. I'm human, Sergeant. I know that. What I mean is you're a human who can throw a tank. That makes you an outlier. And outliers in the military get attention, whether they want it or not. Command is going to want to know if there are more like you, if this is something we can expect from other human recruits, or if you're a one-off. I don't know if there are others. My dad could have been like me, but he's gone. I never met anyone else who could do what I do, which makes you valuable and complicated in equal measure. Vach tapped his claws on the desk, the rhythm slow and deliberate. Here's the situation. You've passed your initial training assessments. You're physically capable, mentally sound, and by all accounts willing to follow orders. But you've also just demonstrated a level of capability that our standard training protocols weren't designed to handle. That means we need to figure out how to use you without breaking you or the people around you. Reyes' jaw tightened. Are you pulling me from the program? No, but I'm assigning you to a specialized track. You'll continue your basic training, but you'll also be working with our Combat Engineering Division to test your limits and develop protocols for integrating your capabilities into operational frameworks. You'll be doing heavy lifting, obstacle removal, structural breaching, that kind of thing. Tasks that normally require equipment or full squads. If you can do them solo, you save us time and resources. If you can't, we figure out where your ceiling is and plan accordingly. And if I don't want to be a test subject? Vok's expression didn't change. Then you wash out and we send you home. That's your right as a recruit, but I don't think that's what you want. I think you came here because you wanted to prove something, either to yourself or to everyone who thinks humans don't belong in the coalition. Am I wrong? Reyes didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Vok. I came here because I wanted to help. My planet just joined the coalition. We're new. We don't have a reputation yet. I figured if I served, did my part, it'd show people we're worth having around. But if all I'm doing is being a freak show, that doesn't help anyone. It's not a freak show if it's useful. And trust me, Reyes, what you can do is useful. The question is whether you're willing to let us figure out how. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. Good. Report to the Combat Engineering Section tomorrow at 0600. Supervisor's name is Chief Reyes. He's Krelin, used to run demolition crews during the border conflicts. He'll put you through your paces and see what you can handle. In the meantime, stay away from the other recruits. I don't need rumors spreading faster than I can manage them. Reyes stood and saluted. Vok returned the gesture, and she left the office without another word. When the door closed behind her, Vok picked up the datapad again and pulled up the recording footage of the tank throw. He'd watched it a dozen times already, but he couldn't stop replaying the moment when Reyes twisted her torso and released, the way the tank just sailed through the air like it weighed nothing. He thought about the Drethian incursion, the way his unit had been pinned down for 3 days because a single heavy bunker blocked their advance and they didn't have the ordnance to crack it. He thought about how many lives could have been saved if they'd had someone like Reyes on the roster, someone who could walk up to that bunker and pull it apart with their bare hands. He closed the file and sent a message to command flagging Reyes's case as high priority. Whatever she was, the coalition needed more of her, or at least they needed to understand why there was only one. The Combat Engineering Section occupied the southern end of Station Taros, a sprawling complex of workshops, testing ranges, and storage bays filled with equipment that ranged from cutting-edge to catastrophically obsolete. Chief Reyes ran the section with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades making things explode in controlled environments. And when Reyes arrived at 0600 the next morning, he was waiting for her in the main workshop, arms folded, mandibles clicking in what might have been curiosity or skepticism. Reyes was shorter than most Krelin, his exoskeleton marked with scars and scorch marks that suggested a career spent very close to things that went boom. His translator rendered his voice as gravelly and clipped, each word sounding like it had been chiseled out of stone. He looked Reyes up and down, then gestured toward a stack of steel beams piled near the back of the workshop. You're the one who threw the tank. Yes, Chief. Vok says you're stronger than you look. I don't care about looks. I care about results. Those beams over there weigh 2 tons each, standard load for a cargo mech. I want you to carry one from here to the far end of the bay. Straight line. No breaks. Can you do that? Reyes walked over to the stack, grabbed the top beam with both hands and lifted it onto her shoulder like it was a piece of lumber. She turned, adjusted her balance and started walking. The beam didn't wobble. She didn't slow down. She crossed the bay in 30 seconds flat, set the beam down gently and walked back. Reyes clicked his mandibles. Again, this time take 2. Reyes grabbed 2 beams, one on each shoulder, and made the crossing again. 40 seconds. Reyes made a note on his datapad. 3. She stacked 3 beams, braced them with her arms, and carried them across. 55 seconds. The beams shifted slightly as she walked, but she corrected without stumbling. Reyes watched her set them down and then said, "How many do you think you can carry?" Reyes looked at the stack. "How many do you have?" 12. Let's find out. She spent the next hour hauling steel, By the time she finished, the entire stack had been relocated to the far end of the bay, and Rallis had filled 3 pages of notes on his datapad. She wasn't even breathing hard. Her uniform showed some sweat stains, but she moved with the same easy rhythm she'd started with. Rallis set the datapad down and approached her, mandibles clicking in a pattern that his translator didn't bother converting. He stopped a meter away and said, "You just did the work of a full mech crew in 1/10 of the time. No equipment, no malfunctions, no recalibration breaks. You understand what that means?" Reyes shrugged. "Means I can carry stuff. Means you're a logistics asset. Means if we're deploying in terrain where mechs can't operate, you're worth 3 squads. Means you're going to spend the next few weeks hauling, lifting, and breaking things until I know exactly what your tolerances are. You have a problem with that?" "No, Chief." "Good. Tomorrow you're going to help me test a new portable barricade system. It's supposed to be assembled by a 4-person crew in 20 minutes. I want to see if you can do it solo in 5. After that, we're going to see how much force it takes to breach a reinforced door when you're the one applying the force. Any questions?" "Just one. Why do you need to know all this?" Rallis's mandibles went still. "Because if you deploy with a unit and you don't know your limits, you're going to push too hard or not hard enough, and people are going to die because you guessed wrong. My job is to make sure you don't guess. My job is to give you data. You understand?" Reyes nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it. Then go clean up. You're dismissed until tomorrow." She left the workshop, and Rallis stood there for a long moment, staring at the relocated stack of beams. He'd been running combat engineering for 15 cycles. He'd trained Krelin, Zenthari, Drethians, even a few Velians who thought they wanted to learn demolition work before realizing it involved more math than explosions. He'd never trained anyone like Reyes. She wasn't just strong. She was effortlessly strong, the kind of strength that didn't come from conditioning or training, but from something fundamental in the way her body was built. It was the kind of strength that made him think about the old Krelin myths, stories about warriors who could shatter mountains and reshape rivers with their hands. He'd always thought those were just stories. He picked up his datapad and sent a message to Vok. 3 words. "She's the real deal." Over the next 2 weeks, Reyes became a fixture in the combat engineering section. She assembled barricades, breached doors, hauled equipment crates that normally required loading mechs, and tested structural limits on everything from blast walls to reinforced hatches. Rallis documented every test, building a profile of her capabilities that read like a technical manual for a piece of heavy machinery. She could lift up to 90 metric tons in a sustained hold. She could throw objects weighing up to 80 tons approximately 7 meters with reasonable accuracy. She could punch through standard durasteel plating with repeated impacts, though it took effort and left her knuckles bruised. She could carry loads equivalent to her body weight for extended distances without fatigue, and her recovery time after exertion averaged 4 to 6 hours depending on intensity. The data was impressive, but what stood out to Rallis more than the numbers was the way Reyes approached the work. She was methodical, patient, and willing to fail if failure taught her something. When a barricade assembly test went wrong because she applied too much torque and stripped a bolt, she didn't get frustrated. She asked Rallis to show her the correct amount of force, practiced until she got it right, and then ran the test again. When she breached a door so hard it flew off its hinges and embedded itself in the far wall, she apologized and asked if there was a way to modulate her output for controlled breaches. Rallis showed her how to angle her strikes, and she adapted immediately. By the end of the 2nd week, Rallis had a proposal ready for Vok. He submitted it through official channels with a priority flag, and 2 days later he was called into Vok's office for a meeting that included 3 other senior officers and a holographic representative from Coalition Command. The meeting lasted an hour. Rallis presented his data, answered questions, and made his case. When it was over, Vok thanked him and told him to continue training Reyes while Command reviewed the proposal. Reyes didn't ask what the proposal entailed. He already knew. He'd written it himself. The coalition needed heavy assault specialists, soldiers who could operate in environments where standard equipment failed or terrain made mechanized support impossible. Reyes fit that profile better than anyone Reyes had ever trained. The proposal recommended creating a pilot program to identify and develop similar individuals, using Reyes as the template. It also recommended deploying her on a trial mission to test her capabilities in a real operational context. Command approved the proposal 3 days later. Reyes was officially reassigned to a newly created combat specialty designation, Heavy Assault Operations, and given orders to deploy with a coalition rapid response unit scheduled to investigate a distress signal from a mining colony on the edge of contested space. The mission briefing described the colony as potentially compromised by hostile forces, details sparse, threat level unknown. Standard deployment for a rapid response unit, except this time, the unit included someone who could throw a tank. Vok called Reyes into his office the day before deployment and handed her a datapad with the mission parameters. She read through it in silence, then looked up. "Why me? I'm still in basic training." "Because this mission needs someone with your capabilities, and you're the only one we have. The colony's infrastructure is old, pre-coalition construction, which means lots of narrow corridors, heavy doors, and structural weak points that standard breaching equipment might not handle efficiently. You're faster and more adaptable than a mech, and you don't need a power supply. Plus, this is a low-risk deployment. The distress signal is 3 days old. Whatever happened there is probably over. You're going in to secure the site and assist with evacuations if needed. Think of it as a field test. And if it's not over, if there are hostiles, then you follow the orders of your unit commander and do what you're trained to do. You've been cleared for combat duty. Reyes says you're ready. I trust his judgment." Reyes set the datapad down. "What if I mess up? What if I use too much force and hurt someone on my side?" Vok's expression softened just slightly. "Then you learn from it and do better next time. That's all any of us can do. You're not expected to be perfect, Reyes. You're expected to be competent and willing to adapt. So far you've been both. Don't overthink it." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do my best. That's all I'm asking." She left the office, and Vok watched her go, feeling the familiar weight of command settling over him like a heavy cloak. He'd sent a lot of recruits into the field over the years, and every time he did, he wondered if he was sending them to their deaths. Reyes was different. She was stronger, more capable, more resilient than anyone he'd trained. But she was also alone in a way the other recruits weren't. She didn't have a peer group, didn't have anyone who understood what she could do or what it felt like to be her. She had Reyes's data and Vok's orders, and a designation that made her sound like a piece of equipment instead of a person. Vok pulled up her file one more time and added a note to the personnel record. Cadet Reyes has demonstrated exceptional capability and adaptability. Recommend continued monitoring and support to ensure successful integration into operational units. She is an asset to the coalition, but she is also a recruit who deserves the same care and respect afforded to any soldier under our command. He closed the file and looked out the window at the training yard, where another squad was attempting to move the repaired tank simulator using mag clamps and tow cables. They were struggling, shouting at each other, recalibrating their approach. It was taking them 20 minutes and counting. Vok allowed himself a brief smile. Reyes had ruined the curve for everyone. The transport to the mining colony was a coalition frigate called the Dawnbreaker, a mid-sized vessel designed for rapid deployment and light combat support. Reyes boarded with her assigned unit, a 12-person rapid response team led by a Zenthari commander named Kalier, who moved with the kind of calm precision that came from years of field experience. The rest of the team was a mix of species and specialties, including 2 Krelin combat engineers, a Velian medic, 3 human riflemen, and a pair of Drethian scouts who spent most of the journey checking their gear in silence. Reyes was assigned a bunk in the crew quarters, a narrow alcove with a sleep pod and a storage locker. She stowed her gear, reviewed the mission briefing again, and then sat on the edge of the pod, staring at the wall. She'd never been off station before. She'd never deployed on a mission. She'd signed up for the Coalition because it seemed like the right thing to do, because her planet needed people willing to serve, because she wanted to prove that humans belonged. Now she was sitting in a frigate bunk, light years from home, about to walk into a situation that might involve hostile forces and structural breaches, and all the things Rallas had trained her for in controlled environments. It didn't feel real yet. It felt like a drill that hadn't ended. One of the human riflemen, a woman named Park, leaned into the alcove and knocked on the frame. "You Reyes?" "Yeah." "Heard you're the one who threw the tank on Taros. That true?" Reyes hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." Park grinned. "That's badass. We've got a bet going about whether you can punch through a blast door. I've got 50 credits says you can. I don't know. Haven't tried it on a real door yet. Well, if we run into one on this mission, give it a shot. I could use the money." Park left, still grinning, and Reyes sat back down. She didn't know if she liked being a bet or a story. She didn't know if she liked being known for throwing a tank. But she also didn't know how to be anything else. This was who she was now, the human who could lift things no one else could lift, the outlier, the asset. The Dawnbreaker dropped out of FTL 3 hours later, and Commander Kalier called the unit to the briefing room. The mining colony designated Outpost Vex 7 appeared on the holo display, a cluster of prefabricated structures built into the side of a rocky plateau. The colony had been operational for 6 years, staffed by a rotating crew of 30 miners and support personnel. The distress signal had been transmitted 4 days ago, a standard emergency beacon with no additional context. Follow-up communication attempts had gone unanswered. Scans showed no active power signatures, no life signs, and no obvious signs of damage from orbit. The mission was to deploy, investigate, secure the site, and extract any survivors or recoverable data. Kalier's voice was calm and measured as he outlined the approach. "We'll land at the primary access point and proceed through the main facility corridor by corridor. Standard sweep protocol. Stay tight, stay alert, and call out anything unusual. Reyes, you're with the breach team. If we encounter sealed doors or structural obstacles, you're our primary solution. Understood?" Reyes nodded. "Understood, Commander." The landing was smooth, the frigate settling onto a flat expanse of rock about 100 meters from the colony's main entrance. The team disembarked in formation, weapons ready, scanning the perimeter for threats. The air was thin and cold, the sky above a pale gray streaked with clouds that looked like torn fabric. The colony itself was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy and wrong. No machinery hum, no voices, no movement. Just wind and rock and the faint metallic smell of oxidized steel. Kalier led the team to the main entrance, a reinforced hatch set into the side of the plateau. The hatch was closed, its control panel dark. One of the Krelin engineers stepped forward, examined the panel, and shook his head. "No power. Manual override is probably locked from the inside. We'll need to cut through or force it." Kalier looked at Reyes. "Can you open it?" Reyes stepped up to the hatch, examined the seam where it met the frame, and slid her fingers into the gap. The metal was cold and slightly corroded, the edges rough against her skin. She took a breath, braced her legs, and pulled. The hatch groaned, metal scraping against metal, and then it shifted. She adjusted her grip, pulled harder, and the hatch tore free from its frame with a sound like a building collapsing in slow motion. She set it down to the side, stepped back and looked at Kalier. He nodded. "Good work, proceed." The team entered the colony, moving through the darkened corridors with weapons raised and lights active. The interior was a maze of narrow passages and prefab rooms, every surface coated in a thin layer of dust. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been circulated in days. The first few rooms were empty, stripped of anything valuable, furniture overturned, consoles smashed. It looked like an evacuation, but a chaotic one. No bodies, no blood, just the aftermath of people leaving in a hurry. They found the first door 20 meters in, a heavy blast door that sealed off the residential section. The control panel was dead, the manual override lever missing. Kalier signaled Reyes forward. She examined the door, noted the reinforced plating, and calculated the angle. She pulled back her fist and struck the center of the door with controlled force. The impact echoed through the corridor, loud enough to make the team flinch. The door buckled but didn't break. She struck again. The plating cracked. A third strike and the door collapsed inward, hanging at an angle from its damaged frame. Park whistled softly. "Told you she could do it." They moved through the residential section, finding more empty rooms, more signs of hasty departure. The Velian medic flagged traces of blood near one of the bunks, but the sample was old and degraded, impossible to analyze for species or cause. The Drethian scouts found claw marks on one of the walls, deep gouges that suggested something large and strong had been in the colony. But there was no way to tell if the marks were recent or part of the facility's history. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere shifted. The colony felt wrong, not just empty but violated, like something had moved through it and left a residue of unease. Reyes felt it in the pit of her stomach, a crawling sensation that made her check over her shoulder every few meters. The rest of the team felt it too. The chatter over the comm link dropped to clipped confirmations and status updates. No one joked anymore. They reached the central operations hub 30 minutes into the sweep. The hub was a large circular room filled with consoles, storage lockers, and a massive data terminal at the center. The terminal was still active, running on backup power, its screen flickering with corrupted data streams. One of the Krelin engineers approached, interfaced with the terminal, and started pulling logs. Kalier posted guards at the entrances and signaled the rest of the team to spread out and secure the room. Reyes moved to the far side of the hub where a storage locker stood open, its contents scattered across the floor. She crouched down, examining the debris. Ration packs, medical supplies, a broken data slate, nothing unusual. She stood up and turned to head back to the group when she heard it. A low scraping sound, metal on stone, coming from somewhere below. She keyed her comm. "Commander, I'm hearing something. Level below us, I think." Kalier's reply was immediate. "Hold position." "I'm sending a scout to check." One of the Drethians moved to the access hatch leading down, cracked it open, and peered inside. A few seconds passed. Then the Drethian jerked back, mandibles clicking in alarm, and slammed the hatch shut. "Contact. Something's down there, big, moving fast." Kalier barked orders, the team snapping into defensive positions around the hub. Reyes moved to the center, near the terminal, her pulse quickening. The scraping sound grew louder closer, and then the floor beneath her feet shuddered. The Krelin engineer at the terminal looked up, eyes wide. "It's coming through the floor." The plating buckled, a section near the far wall bulging upward, and then something burst through in a spray of metal fragments and dust. It was massive, easily 3 meters tall, covered in chitinous plating that gleamed like polished obsidian. 6 limbs, each ending in claws the size of Reyes's forearm. No eyes that she could see, just a cluster of sensory pits arranged around what might have been a head. It moved fast, faster than something that size had any right to move, and it lunged straight for the nearest soldier. The team opened fire, plasma bolts and kinetic rounds slamming into the creature's plating. Some of the shots bounced off. Some left scorch marks. The creature didn't slow down. It grabbed the soldier, a human named Chen, and flung him across the room. Chen hit the wall hard, his armor cracking, and dropped to the floor. The Velian medic started toward him, but Kalir shouted for her to stay back. Reyes didn't think. She just moved. She closed the distance to the creature in 3 strides, grabbed one of its limbs, and pulled. The creature spun toward her, mandibles spreading, and lashed out with another limb. She ducked, braced her legs, and yanked hard enough to destabilize the creature's balance. It staggered, claws scraping the floor, and Reyes used the opening to shift her grip. She grabbed the creature by what might have been its thorax, lifted it off the ground, and slammed it into the floor. The impact cratered the plating, sent shockwaves rippling through the room, and left the creature twitching but not dead. Kalir shouted, "Again! Don't let it recover!" Reyes lifted the creature again, spun, and threw it at the wall. The creature hit with enough force to embed itself in the metal, limbs spasming, plating cracked. The team fired another volley, concentrating fire on the cracks, and this time the rounds punched through. The creature let out a sound like grinding stone, thrashed once more, and went still. The room went silent except for the sound of cooling metal and ragged breathing. Chen was on his feet, helped up by the Velian medic, his armor cracked but holding. Kalir moved to the creature's body, weapon still raised, and nudged it with his boot. It didn't move. He looked at Reyes, his expression unreadable behind his tactical visor. "Report, are you injured?" Reyes checked herself quickly. Her knuckles were bruised, her uniform torn at the shoulder where one of the creature's claws had grazed her, but nothing serious. "I'm fine, Commander. Minor scrapes." "Good." Everyone else, status check. The team called in one by one. Chen had a concussion and 2 cracked ribs but could move. Everyone else was shaken but operational. The Kreelan engineer at the terminal finished pulling the logs and uploaded them to a portable drive. "Got it, Commander." Colony went dark 4 days ago. Logs show multiple breaches in the lower levels. These things came up through the mining tunnels. The crew tried to seal them off and evacuate, but at least 6 people didn't make it to the transport. Kalir's jaw tightened. 6 unaccounted for. "We need to sweep the lower levels and confirm casualties before we extract." "Reyes, your point. If we run into more of these things, I need you to do exactly what you just did. Can you handle that?" Reyes looked at the creature's body, then back at Kalir. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline still coursing through her system, but her voice was steady. "Yes, Commander. I can handle it." They descended into the lower levels through the access hatch the creature had used, moving in tight formation with lights sweeping every shadow. The tunnels were narrow and rough-cut, more natural cave than engineered corridor, the walls slick with moisture and something that might have been fungal growth. The air smelled worse down here, a mix of decay and chemicals that made breathing unpleasant. The Drethian scouts took lead, their enhanced senses better suited for detecting movement in the dark. They found the first body 20 meters in, a human miner named according to his ID tag as Davos. He'd been torn apart, the wounds consistent with the creature they just killed. The medic documented the remains and moved on. They found 2 more bodies in the next tunnel, both Zenthari, both in similar condition. The team's mood darkened with each discovery, conversation dropping to hand signals and necessary updates only. Reyes felt the weight of it settling over her like a wet blanket. She trained for combat, listened to Rallis's lectures about operational stress and how to compartmentalize, but nothing prepared you for the reality of bodies that used to be people. She kept moving because stopping meant thinking too hard, and thinking too hard meant freezing up. They found the nest 30 meters deeper, a widened section of tunnel where the rock had been scraped away to create a chamber. 3 more creatures were inside, smaller than the first but still dangerous, clustered around what looked like egg sacs attached to the walls. The moment the team entered, the creatures turned and attacked. This time Reyes was ready. She grabbed the first creature by its nearest limb, used its momentum against it, and slammed it into the tunnel wall hard enough to crack the rock. The second creature lunged at Kalir. Reyes intercepted it mid-leap, catching it in both arms and driving it into the ground. The third creature went for the scouts. Park and another rifleman opened fire, keeping it suppressed while Reyes dispatched the second creature with a series of focused strikes to its thorax. By the time she turned to help with the third, the combined fire had brought it down. Kalir surveyed the nest, then looked at the egg sacs. "We can't leave these. If they hatch, the colony becomes unusable and we risk contamination spreading to other systems. Recommendations." One of the Krelin engineers stepped forward. "Standard incendiary charges will do it. We set them on a timer, seal the tunnel, and let the heat sterilize the chamber." "Do it. We've got 10 minutes to finish the sweep and extract." They found the remaining 3 bodies in a storage alcove near the nest, miners who tried to hide and been discovered. The medic logged each one, her movements mechanical and efficient, and then they moved back toward the surface. The Krelin engineer set the charges, activated the timer, and they climbed back up to the operations hub. The team regrouped, confirmed headcount, and moved toward the exit in double time. The charges detonated as they cleared the main entrance, a muffled thump that shook the ground and sent a plume of smoke rising from the ventilation shafts. Kalir called for extraction, and the Dawnbreaker descended from orbit to retrieve them. The team boarded in silence, exhausted and grim, and Reyes found herself back in her bunk staring at the ceiling while the frigate lifted off. Park stopped by the alcove an hour later and leaned against the frame. "You saved Chen's life back there. Probably saved all of us." "Those things were fast." Reyes didn't look at her. "I just did what I was trained to do." "Yeah, but you did it better than anyone expected. That's worth something." Park left and Reyes closed her eyes. She could still feel the impact of the creature hitting the floor, the way its plating cracked under her hands, the weight of bodies in tunnels that smelled like death. Rallas had been right. Data mattered. Knowing her limits mattered. But knowing her limits didn't make using them any easier. The debriefing happened 2 days later, back on Station Taros, in a conference room that felt too small for the number of senior officers packed into it. Kalir gave his report first, detailing the mission from insertion to extraction, the creatures encountered, the casualties confirmed, and the sterilization of the nest. Then it was Reyes' turn. She stood at attention and recounted her actions as clearly as she could, focusing on facts and leaving out the parts where her hands had shaken or her stomach had turned. The officers asked questions. How much force had she used? Had she felt any physical limitations? How quickly had she recovered after exertion? She answered each one, her voice steady, her posture rigid. When the questions ended, Vox stood and addressed the room. Cadet Reyes performed her duties with distinction and adaptability under combat conditions. Her capabilities proved critical to mission success and the survival of her unit. I'm recommending her for promotion to specialist rank and continued deployment with rapid response units as a heavy assault operative. One of the other officers, a Velian admiral named Serranos, leaned forward. "Her performance is noted, Sergeant. However, we must also consider the broader implications. She is a singular case. We have no other human recruits with comparable capabilities. Deploying her repeatedly without understanding the full extent of her limitations risks both her safety and operational integrity. I propose we continue her current training regimen while also initiating a search for similar individuals among the human population." Vok nodded. "Agreed. Chief Rallas has already submitted a proposal for a pilot program to identify and develop heavy assault specialists. Command approved it pending the outcome of this mission. I'd say the outcome speaks for itself." Serranos looked at Reyes. "Specialist Reyes, do you understand that your continued service will likely involve high-risk deployments and extensive testing to refine operational protocols?" Reyes met the Admiral's gaze without flinching. Yes, Admiral, I understand. And you are willing to accept this designation. Yes, Admiral. Serrano sat back. Then let it be recorded. Cadet Reyes is hereby promoted to specialist rank and assigned to heavy assault operations. Dismissed. Reyes saluted, the room returned the gesture, and she left feeling like she'd just signed a contract she didn't fully understand. But she'd meant what she said. She was willing. She'd come to the coalition to help, to prove that humans belonged, and if that meant being the one who threw tanks and punched through doors and faced things that came out of tunnels in the dark, then that's what she'd do. 3 weeks later, Reyes stood in the same training yard where she'd thrown the tank, except this time she wasn't alone. 5 other human recruits stood with her, each one flagged during intake processing for elevated strength markers similar to hers. They weren't as strong as she was, the tests had confirmed that, but they were stronger than baseline, strong enough to qualify for the pilot program Rallas had designed. Rallas walked down the line, mandibles clicking as he assessed each recruit. When he reached Reyes, he stopped and said, "You're the template now. They're here because of what you did. That means you set the standard. You understand." Reyes looked at the other recruits, saw the mix of excitement and nervousness in their faces, and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't the only one. They were building something here, something that hadn't existed before, and she was part of it not because she was a problem or a freak show, but because she was capable and willing and human. She looked back at Rallas and nodded. "I understand, Chief. Good, then let's get to work." The training began the next morning. Rallas pushed them hard, testing tolerances, building protocols, documenting everything. The other recruits struggled at first, adapting to the realization that their strength came with responsibility and risk, but they adapted. Reyes helped where she could, showing them techniques she'd learned, sharing what Rallas had taught her about control and modulation, and knowing when to push and when to hold back. By the end of the first month, the program had its first graduating class. All 5 recruits passed certification and received their assignments to various rapid response and combat engineering units across the coalition. Reyes was assigned to a permanent rapid response team under Commander Kalier, who'd specifically requested her after the mining colony mission. The day before deployment, Vok called her into his office one last time. She entered expecting another briefing or last-minute instruction, but instead Vok just gestured to the chair and waited until she sat. He folded his arms and looked at her for a long moment. "You've come a long way since you bent that door handle, Reyes." She allowed herself a small smile. "That feels like a lifetime ago, Sergeant. It was 2 months ago. That's how fast things move in the military. You adapt or you wash out. You adapted." He paused, then continued. "I'm not going to lie to you. The deployments you're heading into are going to be dangerous. You're going to see things that are worse than what you saw on that mining colony. You're going to lose people. You're going to make mistakes. But you're also going to save lives, and you're going to prove every single day that humans don't just belong in the coalition. You redefine what we thought was possible." Reyes felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Sergeant, for believing in me. For not pulling me when you could have. I didn't believe in you because I'm sentimental. I believed in you because you earned it. Keep earning it, Specialist. That's all any of us can do." She stood, saluted, and left the office. The training yard was empty now, the tank simulator gone, moved to another station for another batch of recruits. The gravel still showed the crater where she'd thrown it, a permanent mark that would probably stay there until someone bothered to fill it in. She stood at the edge and looked at the indentation, remembering the way the laughter had died, the way everything had changed in the span of seconds. Her comm link chimed. Kalier's voice came through, clipped and professional. "Specialist Reyes, report to the Dawnbreaker at 0800 tomorrow. We've got a new assignment. Hostage extraction on a compromised station near the Drethian border. Brief is in your queue." "Understood, Commander. I'll be there." She cut the link and looked up at the synthetic sky, pale and engineered, and nothing like the real sky back home on Earth. She thought about her father, carrying that steel beam up 4 flights of stairs. She thought about the recruits who'd laughed when she walked up to the tank. She thought about Chen, cracked ribs and all, thanking her after the mission. She thought about Park's bet and Rallis's data and Vox's final words. Then she turned and walked back toward the barracks, her stride even and confident, ready for whatever came next. She was Specialist Reyes, human, heavy assault operative, the woman who threw a tank and proved that humans didn't just belong in the Galactic Coalition. They redefined it. The story of how she'd arrived here would become legend, passed around in mess halls and briefing rooms, exaggerated and mythologized until it barely resembled the truth. But the truth was simpler and more important. She'd been strong and she'd been willing, and when the moment came, she'd lifted something no one thought could be lifted and thrown it farther than anyone thought possible. And that, more than anything else, was what it meant to be human. 6 months later, the Coalition's recruitment materials for Earth included a new section. It featured a photo of a young woman with dark hair and a quiet smile, standing in front of a massive piece of industrial equipment. The caption read, "Specialist Reyes, first heavy assault operative. Humans stronger than you think." The recruitment numbers tripled in the first quarter.